To speak about individual liberty, one must speak about human nature. On a superficial level, I consider human nature to be exactly what I see. People can be monsters willing to lie, cheat, steal, control others, and create war. On the other hand, people have the ability to be saints, giving freely, embracing integrity, and helping others. If people are left to their own devices, as Thomas Hobbes believed, they would resort to the original state of nature, one that is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. If he is correct, then human beings need to be controlled by a state or some external force. This is the original social contract. Unfortunately for Hobbes, we do have a social contract, and people are still solitary, poor, nasty, and brutish. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Wilhelm von Humboldt questioned the social contract and believed that the state tends to make man an instrument to serve its arbitrary ends, overlooking his individual purposes. And since man is in essence a free, searching, self-perfecting being, it follows that the state is a profoundly anti-human institution. Bakunin, almost 100 years later, echoed Humboldt when he said, "I am a fanatical lover of liberty, considering it the only medium in which I can develop intelligence, dignity, and the happiness of man." He goes on, "I mean the only liberty which is truly worthy of the name, the liberty which consists in the full development of all material, intellectual, and moral powers which are to be found as faculties latent in everybody, the liberty which recognizes no other restriction than those which are traced for us by the laws of our own nature, so that properly speaking, there are no restrictions, since these laws are not imposed on us by some outside legislator, beside us or above us, they are immanent in us, inherent, constituting the very basis of our being, material as well as intellectual and moral." Bakunin aligns himself with traditional individualists when he says, "The liberty of man consists solely in this, that he obeys natural laws because he himself recognized them as such, and not because they have been externally imposed upon him by some extrinsic will whatever, divine or human, collective or individual." In this sense, Bakunin would agree with the classical liberals such as John Locke. But Bakunin did not stop his analysis here. He noticed that it was pointless to speak of human liberty as if human beings were isolated subjects living in a vacuum. If an individual was born and existed alone on an island, the isolated individual cannot possibly become conscious of his freedom. He just does whatever he wants. It was only in relation to others that liberty was either harnessed or stifled. When speaking about the elite industrialists of his day, he said, "They want this anarchy only for themselves, not for the masses." If it is true that a person is in essence a free, searching, self-perfecting being, then negative liberty, while mandatory, is not enough to produce a free society. After all, one can consent to chattel slavery and still be considered a free person under these conditions. However, that person is still a slave, and therefore not free. For Bakunin, freedom was much more than this, and could only be realized when every individual, man or woman, should find, upon entering life, approximately equal means for the development of his or her diverse faculties and their utilization in his or her work. I think Bakunin would agree with Humboldt when he says, "To inquire and to create, these are the centers around which all human pursuits more or less directly revolve. But all moral culture springs solely and immediately from the inner life of the soul and can never be produced by external and artificial contrivances. The cultivation of the understanding, as of any of man's other faculties, is generally achieved by his own activity, his own ingenuity, and his own methods of using the discoveries of others." For most, positive and negative liberty are perceived to be at odds. This is not necessarily the case, for Bakunin pointed out that a person who is dying from starvation, who is crushed by poverty, who every day is on the point of death from cold and hunger, and who sees everyone he loves suffering likewise, but is unable to come to their aid, is not free. That person is a slave. For some, a person in this condition could still be considered a free being, living in a free society. I should note that Bakunin wasn't interested in imposing state action to produce positive liberty. It was only under free association and voluntary action that positive liberty would be a natural outgrowth of humanity. This would help develop all the faculties and powers of every human being by education, by scientific training, and by material prosperity, things which can only be provided for every individual by the collective, material, intellectual, manual, and sedentary labor of a society in general. For Bakunin, freedom has a social context. In some ways, DNA can be seen as the seed, society its soil. Whatever is produced, whether they be flowers or weeds, depends on liberty and whether the DNA is allowed to fulfill its growth, to express its inner being, or to wither away. Not only does Bakunin extend his ideas of liberty beyond the state, the individual, voluntarism, and free association, but he extends them into the realm of society itself. He recognizes that collective groups can crush human liberty. He warned of the predatory nature of society when he said, "The action of social tyranny is gentler, more insidious, more imperceptible, but no less powerful and pervasive than is the authority of the state. It dominates men by customs, by mores, by the mass of prejudices, by the habits of daily life, all of which combine to form what is called public opinion. It overwhelms the individual from birth. It permeates every facet of life so that each individual is, often unknowingly, in a sort of conspiracy against himself. It exercises over him. He must at least, to some extent, revolt against himself. For a man born into a society of brutes tends to remain a brute. Born into a society ruled by priests, he becomes an idiot, a sanctimonious hypocrite. Born into a band of thieves, he will probably become a thief. And if he is unfortunately born into a society of demagogues who rules this earth, nobles, princes, he will become a contemptible enslaver of society, a tyrant. In all of these cases, revolt against the society in which he was born is indispensable for the humanization of the individual, because society, so to speak, individualizes itself in every individual. To sum up the left libertarian perspective, a healthy, free community will produce free individuals who in turn will shape the community and enrich social relationships between the people of whom it is composed. To quote Rudolf Rocker, "Liberties do not exist because they have been legally set down on a piece of paper, but only when they have become the ingrown habits of a people, and when any attempt to impair them will meet with violent resistance of the populace." A left libertarian, by their very nature, are in a visceral revolt against anything that hinders liberty. They look for it in all aspects of life, in the family, in religion, in the state, in personal relationships, within themselves, and are willing to tear it down limb by limb. This is a revolt of the individual against all divine, collective, and individual authority. Only in freedom would human dignity of the individual consist precisely in this, that he does because he is not forced to do so, but because he freely conceives it, wants it, and loves it. Bakunin doesn't want basic freedom, that limited to voluntarism. He wants maximized freedom, that is, total freedom. This cannot happen in the individual alone because liberty is a multifaceted project. Bakunin sums up his theory by saying, "Society is the root, the tree, and liberty is its fruit. Hence, in every epoch, man must seek his freedom not at the beginning, but at the end of history. It can be said that the real and complete emancipation of every individual is the true, the great, and supreme aim of history."